Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this March 27th weather update. I'm Matt Reardon. Yesterday, we talked really earlier in the week as well, myself on Tuesday, about a potential rare hail threat in the Pacific Northwest that was likely to materialize yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, in kind of the Portland up near the Seattle-Tacoma area. We didn't see that come to fruition, thankfully. Now, the reason we were talking about it is on your screen now. This is the deep low pressure system that is still currently spinning off of Oregon and Washington. This satellite view is as of yesterday afternoon, and you can see we just kind of focus on the Pacific Northwest, some of the showers and thunderstorms that did develop kind of as predicted, and all the wind shear associated with this low pressure system just off to the west. We didn't quite get the moisture into the Willamette Valley and parts of the Pacific Northwest that we expected. You can think of the elevations there, the valleys, the different microclimates, and it just worked out that the dew points didn't climb enough. The storms didn't have quite enough instability to produce a number of hail reports. Meteorology, it's an inexact science. When you think you have a good handle on it, it humbles you, and I think this is a good example just looking at the Storm Prediction Center. All the storm reports from yesterday, there are virtually none. I don't see any here across the U.S., so none across the Pacific Northwest. We use the term rare. I think it's a reminder that some of these big rare outbreaks, these rare events for different geographies are rare for a reason. It's hard to bring these meteorological ingredients together for a rare event, just inherently, almost definitionally. And that's good news for folks trying to avoid some severe weather this year, where we've already seen quite an uptick. Some other things I wanted to talk about, just kind of happening now in the weather. If we look yesterday afternoon, we have wildfires burning in parts of the Carolinas. Been talking at times about this kind of recurrent southeast drought that extends a bit up into the Carolinas, and unfortunately, over some of the same areas that Hurricane Helene damaged last fall. It's likely not a coincidence. So the downed trees, unfortunately some of the infrastructure issues, it just makes fighting these wildfires a little bit more difficult, makes them a little bit more likely to spread. And if you think about downed trees and foliage and dead foliage, it's dry. When it rains, it doesn't pick up that moisture the way that living growth does, and unfortunately it makes good kindling. So seeing this issue persist here, may see some rains come into this area this weekend, associated with the severe threat that we'll have to talk about, but we're continuing to watch these wildfires here. Kind of international wildfire news, South Korea is dealing at this time with perhaps, as far as acreage and some of the impacts, one of its worst wildfires in history, potentially on record, at least in terms of area burned. Don't have a satellite video of that, but if you just look at the picture here in the southeast part of the country, see just how wide of an area here. I mean, this is a massive area of the country here. You could compare it to like a good chunk of a small state in the United States. So, concerns there. Obviously wish them the best fighting that fire. If we jump back over and just think about kind of the southeast for a second, just pulling up the last topsoil moisture here. This was valid as of this morning out of the NASA estimate. And you can see the Carolinas, parts of that Florida drought here. We've talked about the southern plain droughts at times and some lingering dryness here over both the upper Midwest and the Corn Belt here. We can certainly see the uplands of South Carolina, western North Carolina, the mountains there, and the drought that they're dealing with. If we look at the last 24 hours of precipitation across the continental U.S., the Pacific Northwest, we can see the effects of those showers and storms there. Willamette Valley, up near the Seattle-Tacoma area, some of the Cascades. And then South Texas, we've had our eyes down there. We've talked here for the last 2 or 3 days that there's this upper-level low that's making its way across Mexico into southern Texas. Eventually, it's going to be making its way into some of the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, etc. Right now, it's parked. At least a lot of these thunderstorms and the activity there is over portions of South Texas. We saw rain there yesterday, over an inch in some localized locations, maybe up toward 2 inches. That's going to continue today, and that's going to be a flooding concern that we'll have to talk about in just a few slides here. We jump over and look at the current radar presentation. We've talked kind of about this northwest flow here that's finally kicking off some thunderstorms near the Missouri-Iowa line. Some of these reaching severe thresholds, so a few warnings popping out here this morning just as I've kind of loaded things up. If you look in South Texas, northern Mexico, you can see the influence of that upper level low. And while we did have the rain come through yesterday, you can see kind of the remnants of that lingering showers over Houston, some areas in the metros of southeast Texas. That low hasn't passed. So this is just kind of a lull in activity. In fact, I would expect that today, Thursday, could be more impactful in terms of potentially either some marginal severe weather, but much more likely flooding. That flash flooding threat remains the biggest concern, and flash flood watches are out for this whole area here. That low pressure system is going to be making its way over the day today and through tonight. This activity likely lingering into tomorrow morning, and kind of the duration of the event is what's imparting some of that greater flood threat. If we zoom in on the radar again closer to the Midwest here, you can see that northwest flow, right? This is the flow that we look for in June or July to bring rainfall into parts of the Corn Belt, at least for now, in terms of early April, just bring some early thunderstorms into the area. Perhaps a small hail threat attached to some of these. If we blow this up and look at a little bit different view, this is the current lightning map across the United States. You can see a lot of lightning, pretty electric storms here this morning, north of Kansas City, again near that Missouri-Iowa line. You can see the bubbling activity in Texas and northern Mexico as well. If we jump over and look at the all hazards map, this is as of NOAA. Valid is about 5:30 a.m. Central. Let's see if we can update this closer to 6 a.m. There we go. Do see a severe thunderstorm warning. Again, just one or two of these storms at any given time has a warning on it, likely more so for hail than anything else, but can't rule out some gusty winds associated with that as well. Blow this up a little bit bigger. Look out west, that low pressure system coming closer on shore. And you can see the wind advisories in that beige color there, and then that kind of more mustardy color, if you will, the high wind warnings associated with that low pressure system. The dark green that you see in southern Texas all the way through the southern tip of the state are those flood watches that we're keeping a close eye on. We can also see some flood warnings along some of the streams and the rivers here. We'll have to keep an eye on those as we go through the day today. If we look big picture at the water vapor satellite imagery, this valid as of this morning. Really that low pressure system off the coast of Oregon and Washington, the one we were tracking yesterday for the potential of severe storms all the way up there. It's kind of the big ticket item, I think, looking across the country. If we look closer at parts of Texas and Mexico, I talked about that upper level low. It's hard to see, but if you look at some of these kind of drier signatures here near Cabo coming into northwest Mexico, you can see some of these clouds shooting up here showing ascent in the atmosphere. And it's that ascent that we're so focused on because that's what helps to produce some of these thunderstorms and invigorate them. And you can see it's still a ways off. So we had the storms yesterday. You can see some of the clouds and the cirrus associated with that activity, but this upper level low is still very much, almost half a day away from getting over this area. So as we go through the morning today, as we get into the afternoon, likely to see thunderstorms refire off some of the elevation in northern Mexico near the Rio Grande, push their way into South Texas, where because the system's moving so slowly, these thunderstorms are likely going to be training or parked on the same area. And that's just a recipe for a lot of rain falling in one area all at once. It's actually an area that's in severe drought now. And while you might think that's good news, it also makes a pretty hard pan on that soil, and that can increase runoff and only exacerbate some of the flooding issues. And any thoughts kind of drought go out the window at that point when you're looking at a flash flood. We'll jump over and look at the 3-kilometer NAM, their simulated precip. I'll take this through. Let's get it to 7 a.m. Central Thursday morning. See some of that rainfall that we were talking about and the showers moving across southeast Texas, the storms that we were looking at here, Missouri and Iowa line, some of the showers north of there. So I take this through the day today into this afternoon. You can see that low pressure system coming closer to shore in the Pacific Northwest, increasing the winds and the showers there, the Willamette Valley included in that. As I take this into Thursday evening, you can really see the thunderstorm and the showers picking up in South Texas, some of these getting more up into the central portion of the state, and some lingering showers over portions of the Midwest. I'm going to take this back, and we'll point out briefly that this afternoon, some of those thunderstorms trying to get over into portions of western and central Illinois, and they may be marginally retaining some severe status here, so potentially kind of a more slight, weak hail or wind threat there across parts of Illinois. So I take this forecast through Thursday night. We're now into early Friday morning, 6 a.m. Again, thunderstorms still kind of, at this point, trying to fizzle out overnight into portions of Texas, but those showers continuing into portions of central Texas, even getting up right toward the Oklahoma state line. As the system spins up, you can see additional activity as we go through the day Friday in southeast Texas. It's taking its time getting across the state here. It's a big state, but this is a particularly slow system. As I take this through Friday evening into early Saturday, you can see that activity starting to exit to the east. But I think even as we go through the day Saturday, as I'll show you in a minute here, jumping over the ECMWF, their forecast that this activity is going to kind of continue to bubble across Louisiana. So I'll make this valid here. This is a similar forecast from ECMWF. It's going to take us out further into the forecast. So I'd like to make it valid as of this morning. You can see those showers kind of forecast that we were just talking about. You can see those thunderstorms that we were mentioning, Iowa and Missouri. So take this forecast into Thursday night, now into Friday morning. If you've been keeping your eye in South Texas, kind of west of Corpus Christi, north of Brownsville, the colors are kind of staying the same, that kind of bright yellow there, and that's because we're not expecting the system to move out of that area. Again, that flooding threat increased there. Finally, as we get into Friday evening and then early Saturday, that activity moving to the east, the Midwest clearing out, but parked over Louisiana, parts of Arkansas on Saturday morning. That activity starting to spread out, head further east as we go through Saturday afternoon, even getting up into parts of the middle Mississippi River Valley, trying to inch up into portions of southern Illinois, southern Indiana as we go through Saturday evening, and then into early Sunday morning. And it's really Sunday afternoon when the influence of that low pressure system and that upper level trough that was out here over the Pacific Northwest is making its way all the while that we've been talking about Texas across the Continental Divide, potentially organizing a severe thunderstorm setup in portions of the middle Mississippi River Valley. Even it's been trending a bit west of that, so portions perhaps of eastern Oklahoma, parts of western Missouri, northeast Texas, even northwest Louisiana, and then up into portions of Illinois, maybe even Iowa. And then overnight, as we go through Sunday evening, that activity pushing east and potentially a severe threat following that later into the evening, likely weakening. But what we've seen from the past, we saw from some of these last few outbreaks that we have to keep an eye on these systems overnight. This takes us to 1 a.m. Monday morning. Likely quite a bit of rainfall associated with this, even outside some of these severe thunderstorms. We'll have to keep following this to Monday afternoon about 1 p.m. Central on Monday, now to 8 p.m. Eastern. You can see potentially a line of showers and maybe even severe thunderstorms stretching through the Carolinas, the coastal plain, potentially anywhere from Virginia all the way through Georgia, maybe even Alabama, and we'll have to keep a close eye on this as well. It's a system that we've been following for a while. If we go back to the Sunday afternoon when you can see a wide area of risk outlined from the Storm Prediction Center, I would expect as we can go through the day today and then tomorrow to this, get a little bit more detail to it and more defined. Again, I think it's been trending a bit further west kind of over the last few days in the models. So particularly this area here over portions of Missouri, maybe even eastern Oklahoma, like I mentioned, northeast Texas, northwest Louisiana, a corridor in here likely looking at the most significant severe weather, but don't want to rule out areas further to the east as that system continues into the evening hours. It's going to make that jump across the Appalachians over that kind of nighttime into the next day on Monday afternoon, looking at the severe threat persisting to the east there. Again, likely a quarter kind of in here with the most significant severe weather as this gets updated. There's a wide area here, especially when you consider kind of that some of those storms could still be ongoing in the morning. If we look at some and lean on the machine learning forecasts as we've been doing, I want to take you out to Sunday. And you can see those colors really ramping up that bullseye again in that corridor I kind of highlighted earlier. As I take this into, again, Monday afternoon, you'll see it make that jump, highlighting, again, a more kind of detailed corridor here along the coastal plain, portions of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Now, as we've been talking about precipitation, potentially flash flooding concerns in Texas, unfortunately, while it's early April, we still have to talk a little bit about snow. So as that system wraps up on Sunday, taking into Sunday morning, then Sunday afternoon, likely going to see a narrow swath of snowfall potentially accumulating here in portions of southeast Minnesota, even stretching across towards southern Kansas, Nebraska, parts of Wisconsin, northern Iowa. I don't think we're going to reach a foot like this GFS forecast suggests, but certainly the potential for some decent and significant accumulations here, even stretching across northern Michigan. So I'll have to keep an eye on that as well. I'm going to play this out further. Don't see a tremendous additional snowfall threat for the upper Midwest, but if we look over into the western U.S. going out to next week, we'll talk about this in a moment. Additional snowfall for the Cascades, portion of the Salmon River Mountains in Idaho, north of Boise, and the Sierra Nevada and the Klamath Mountains here. So really we think about kind of April 1st. I've taken this forecast out beyond that as the start of our melt season in portions of the western U.S., but potentially snowing there on April 1st. So we've seen them kind of have a busy March, and that's picked up here over the last kind of 20 to 30 days. And that's continuing into April, it would appear, for additional snowfall there. So good news for some of the hydrology out there. We know they were dealing with wildfires just this past winter. As I kind of wrap up that rainfall conversation, at least in the near term, I want to mention some of the latest forecasts from the ECMWF, even over the next 24 to 48 hours for South Texas, are eye-popping. So some of the numbers here getting close to the end of our color bar here, which is up over 12 at this point. Again, the Corpus Christi area, either west or southwest, really kind of the whole area surrounding that. There are some municipalities in here. Freer, I believe, is over here embedded in some of the kind of greater accumulations here. So they'll want to heed concerns. Again, don't drive through water. A lot of rescues and fatalities, unfortunately, come out from folks trying to cross flooded roadways. I'm going to take the forecast out here. I'm into Monday afternoon. I'll kind of leave us off at the end of that severe threat as we get into early Tuesday morning. I mentioned April 1st, likely snowing in the Sierra Nevada when we think about our melt season beginning. If we look out west, some more systems, low pressure systems coming off the Pacific, moving onshore as we go through Tuesday. Sierra Nevada getting snow, even portions of, if I take this back to Tuesday afternoon. Can see portions of central California, likely seeing showers and precip. And then potentially Wednesday, Thursday of next week, seeing another low pressure system develop across the Midwest. We'll have to see what kind of snow threat might materialize from that. Potentially severe weather extending further south in a similar corridor to what we're looking at on Sunday. All right, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, maybe even eastern Oklahoma. The details of this potential severe threat aren't clear yet. Like this one on Sunday, we'll likely see it move around a little bit, but it is there as we go through the day. Thursday, kind of predictably, that threat area potentially shifts toward the southeast. Now, at this point, it's a 7-day forecast. I'm not going to sit here and paint, an exact corridor for where I think these severe thunderstorms are going to develop. The point I'm making is we have another low pressure system to talk about. It reminds me of a bit of the pattern and how progressive it was in March, where it seems like, you can just schedule every 4 to 5 days. We have another system to talk about more rainfall chances in the Mississippi River Valley extending through portions of the southeast. And then the west, we just look here at the end of next week, or Thursday, April 3rd at this point, potentially additional chances for precipitation in west snowfall. It sounds familiar, so we're kind of sticking with this pattern that we've seen for much of spring at this point as it's gotten going. Southern plains, while there are a few rain chances sprinkled in here, mentioned that cutoff low in southern Texas, but otherwise remaining largely dry, and we'll see that in some of these forecast models I'll show you in just a second. If we jump over to the ECMWF, this is their 10-day precipitation anomaly forecast. Obviously, just including the next 40 hours of precipitation is going to make southern Texas jump off the chart here. Portions of the Pacific Northwest, Eureka, California, portions of the northern Sierra Nevada, and portions of the Cascade, looking at more precipitation over the next 7 to 10-day period. We talked about some of the snowfall chances in the upper Midwest, regardless, some highlighted values there. And then really it's that middle Mississippi River Valley into the mid-south, portions of the southeast, extending into Louisiana, Arkansas, maybe even eastern Oklahoma, looking at above average precip as we start the month of April. If we look west of there, that familiar pattern emerges with Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, northern Texas. After this immediate next system, potentially all of Texas, looking at a drier stretch over the next kind of 8 out to 10 days at this point. I will note that as we'll see those systems push through the southeast, as those low pressure systems kind of depart and wrap up toward the northeast, these thunderstorms will lose a bit of vigor as they head toward the southeast. And it's not uncommon to see this precipitation pattern in this kind of progressive pattern like this, to see Florida, portions of Georgia, portions of the Carolinas miss out on some more widespread thunderstorm coverage. There might be some isolated storms that sneak through here, but if they're not widespread, this drought here that we've been watching, the flash drought, the wildfires that we've talked about in portions of the Carolinas, all the way down toward Homestead, Florida, at the tip of the peninsula there, we'll have to continue to kind of watch for the issues like that if this pattern continues to emerge. As we go out beyond that, my eyes have been focused, and I'll try to zoom this in to show you what I'm talking about. Looks like I went too far there. I'm going to take you well overhead. This is looking at the whole globe here. Let's kind of orient ourselves. Here's the equator running through the middle of the line here. Here's North America. I'll kind of highlight the coastlines here. We often look out over the Pacific to see where our weather might be going. I'm going to do that here, looking at this upper level height pattern from the ECMWF. It's a 5-day rolling window of 500 millibar anomalies. And that's all to say, where are the troughs? Where are the ridges? Where can we expect precipitation or temperature patterns to emerge in April? I'm going to start this on April 1st. And the reason I'm doing that is because we kind of covered all the inclement weather that we talked about through the weekend here. I'm going to start it kind of near the beginning of Tuesday of next week. And really, if I start it right there, right on April 1st, and we're going to let this run out all the way through April 5th, I see kind of two main things that we have to talk about here. One is this omega block in the Pacific. And the reason we call it an omega block is you see this upper level ridge here near the Aleutians. And if we kind of draw out this trough here, up into this ridge here, and then this other trough northeast of Hawaii, I'm kind of drawing the Greek letter omega. And so that's why we call that an omega block. These tend to be sticky. We call them kind of, they block up the atmosphere. Downstream of them, we see these troughs like we do over the western U.S. And that's influencing the same pattern that we just looked at in the ECMWF 10-day forecast. That is wet in the eastern part of the country, the middle Mississippi River Valley, over toward the Tennessee River and the Ohio River Valley, that kind of same area that we highlighted. The troughing here over the west, it's helping to bring renewed snowfall to California, Oregon, cooler temperatures despite kind of heading into April, heading into the melt season, so to speak. We're still seeing snowfall, precipitation chances getting into central California, maybe even at times southern California. So that omega block, in part responsible for that, likely to stick around for a while because it's an atmospheric block. We know they tend to persist a bit longer than other weather patterns. So as I take this in through the 8th of April, Now the 9th and 10th, while it's starting to break down a bit, you can still see this general pattern continuing. Trough west, ridging east, likely a storm track in the middle of that. So potentially severe weather through the first kind of 5, 10, maybe even getting out into 15 days of April. We've been confident in that for a while. The stars have aligned. There's been some decent agreement amongst both models, MJO, climatology that we've talked about. I think it's getting after that window is the big question. We've looked at some of the forecasts here. One thing we'll note is that the MJO, if you can pull that up here, if we come all the way back to the MJO forecast going through the month of April, we've been over here a lot over the last 40 to 60 days here. Right now we're in phase 6, heading into phase 7, and presumably after that going to phase 8 if we're going to believe some of these forecasts. It's this transition here where we've seen this kind of climatologically, or at least historically, for that support for that troughing out west and the rainfall in the east that's increased our confidence in early April. Now, if we stay over here, in the Western Pacific over toward the Western Hemisphere times, phases 7 and 8, that pattern likely to persist through April, wetter than average, potentially warmer as well in the central and eastern part of the country, perhaps less frost and freeze risk. But if it continues to transition, we get into phase 1, even phase 2 by the end of April, early May. Well, if we use that kind of same thinking of what happened in the past when we reached kind of similar phases at this time of year, I'll take you over to phase 2, kind of in the middle of April. And really we see a lot of support for deep troughing over the Great Lakes, the Corn Belt, even portions of getting into the southern plains or the middle Mississippi River Valley and over toward the eastern U.S. That would certainly introduce frost risk if the history is to be believed there. Another way we can see this is, well, we're coming out of a La Nina. So what happens when we went into a phase 2 in a La Nina April? And similarly, you see a lot of troughing across the continental U.S. and a pattern like that. We've talked recently how La Nina has been fading, so just doing our due diligence and looking at, well, don't look at a La Nina or an El Nino, but what about kind of a neutral year like we're trending toward now in April at this point? And again, see that support for troughing across the middle part of the country in the eastern U.S. should that MJO keep transiting, getting back into the Indian Ocean at the end of April. Now, the forecasts aren't saying that right now. In fact, we're kind of sticking over here into phase 7 and 8. So while there is some confidence in the April forecast now, I think there's this threshold, as there kind of always is at that 10 to 15 day mark, where we're not quite sure what's on the other side, at least in terms of that temperature conversation for a frost or freeze risk in the Corn Belt. Eric's going to get more into this tomorrow. I kind of wanted to pose some of the questions that we've been talking about and thinking about before he gets into that. Some of the latest weeklies are out. I'll show you those in just a second here. But that's kind of where we're at with that frost and freeze conversation. I will note one kind of quirk in the models here. If we look out a little bit further, we're talking day 8 through 14 at this point, getting into the middle part of April, out to April 10th at this point. The ECMWF AFS, and then I've seen some reflection of this in the ECMWF ensemble as well, has shown a ridge starting to push more into the central and western U.S. after a lot of this troughing that we just talked about. If we just look, I don't want to delve too much into it because it's so far out in the forecast, but if we look at their 8 to 14 precipitation anomaly, we see what we just talked about here across the middle Mississippi River Valley and the Ohio River Valley of increased precipitation there. But as that ridge moves in after, it's amplified enough that it actually allows some flow to sneak underneath that, which does allow some precipitation to get into portions of the southeast and portions of Texas here. I don't think it's a sure thing at this point, but it's in the AIFS, it's in the ECMWF ensemble, which at this point are different models. So it's something certainly to keep an eye on. We jump out and look at the 8 to 14 day precipitation outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. They're not discounting that scenario. So this would be good news if it develops. We'll have to watch it closely. Again, we're out in the forecast period at this point, 8 to 14 days. So while we're not hyper confident in it, it's something to think about. With the kind of recent dryness in the southern plains, with the dry forecast out through the rest of summer from some of these kind of long-range seasonal models, I've been getting a lot of questions about 2011. I talked about that one, I think, last week. I'm getting questions about 2012. I'm not making any comparisons to 2012 at this point, but I can understand why people are asking it. So a thought experiment I did thinking about both of those is, if we think about April 1st through May 10th, it's just kind of the window that we just talked about, if you will. I wanted to go back and kind of reorient where we were in 2012 in terms of that period and the precipitation pattern. And I think there's some key differences between what's in the forecast now, what we saw in 2011, and then what we saw in 2012. If we focus on 2012 to start, we'd really see the drought kind of anchored here over portions of western Tennessee and western Kentucky, at least to where it had momentum. So so where we saw a lack of precipitation over that time period. That stretched across the southeast over toward portions of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, across portions of the southeast. You can see even starting to extend up into portions of the Corn Belt and the I-states itself. Wet up in the plains, and then drier over the Intermountain West. Now, if I compare that to the forecast for what we know is likely, with pretty high confidence, to be a pretty active early April, we saw this in some of the forecast here. This is just the 10-day from the ECMWF. We showed you the ENS forecast just a second ago, all the way out through April 10th at this point. It's going to be hard-pressed to reproduce the map that we saw in 2012 just based on where we're at in the forecast. Now, it would have to go pretty much bone dry across the same exact area to get to that point. And I don't even think you could. There's just so much rain forecast that we're very unlikely to see a pattern in April and early May that resembles 2012. And I say that because the drought grew out of this and came from portions of East Texas, portions of Arkansas, and it came back up into the I-states as we went through May and into June quickly. 2012, kind of comparing it, looked very different. The drought was very much, at this point, the momentum of it anchored over portions of West Texas, the southern high plains, extending up into the central plains, and then had this component into the Carolinas, over toward Florida, and over toward the Gulf Coast states. While I've not said that this year's going to go exactly like 2011, I have made the case that at least now, what we've seen, just observationally, it looks more like 11 than a lot of these other years. It looks more like 11 at this point than 12. When we look at that forecast for April, with all that activity over the Ohio River Valley, the Middle Mississippi River Valley, some of the I-states here, the pattern that we saw in 11, which saw record wet in that area, at least resembles more of what we're likely to see in the April forecast as well. If that drought continues, and I bring this up, if it continues in the southern plains, if it continues in the central plains as well, it sets up the potential for a heat dome here as we get into the summer months, the convective season, which would likely produce a ridge here across the upper Midwest. You'd get northwest flow in summer and fairly reliable precipitation through parts of the central Corn Belt, unlike what we saw in 12. So that's why this kind of modulation between east and west of the drought here is important between the two, and why I've been kind of comparing them and watching those so closely. Last thing I'll mention here, I haven't talked about temperatures too much at this point. Let's start with maximum temperatures. This is the forecast from the National Weather Service, their high temperature forecast. This is for today, Thursday, the 27th. You can see the anomalous warmth across parts of Kansas, up through portions of the northern high plains in Montana, portions of Wyoming, temperatures exceeding up to the, looks like upper 80s there in western Kansas. As I take this in through Friday, the 28th, see some of that activity spreading east in terms of that warmth, 80s continuing up near South Dakota, Sioux Falls, over toward northwest Iowa, Minnesota as well. Pushing more wholesale through the eastern U.S. as we get into Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. Some of those high temperatures there getting up in toward that 80 degree Fahrenheit number. This is Saturday, the 29th. Sunday pushing a little bit further east, and then that cold temperatures coming in Monday and Tuesday of next week for much of the Midwest, and then over toward the eastern U.S. as we get into the work week next week. Low temperatures at this time, I'll take these quickly through because they're going to show a similar pattern here, but I do want to mention the Midwest, likely seeing a decent freeze, or a frost I should say, getting below that 32 degree Fahrenheit number for portions of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and then more of that deep freeze up in portions of the northern Corn Belt, Minnesota, the Dakotas, and portions of Iowa as well. So likely dropping below that 32 degree Fahrenheit line. If I kind of draw that contour out, at least in terms of those Tuesday low temperatures, you can see it's somewhere along a line here in north. I shouldn't draw that in red. It should be right a purple or a blue colder color. Eric's going to dive more into that temperature conversation in just a second here. I will show you the latest ECMWF weeklies before I kind of close. Right now, I'll take this out in 7-day rolling windows here. We're looking at troughing and ridge pattern across the U.S. right now. As I take this out into early April, we did this earlier. You can see that trough here parked across the western U.S., bringing that activity over next week and even potentially next weekend. Portions of the central and eastern U.S., potentially severe weather to talk about. So take the forecast in through the middle part of April. This is the 7th out through the 14th. You can see still likely dealing with some sort of troughing here, potentially increased activity through the early part of April. As I take the forecast into the 3rd week of April, some deeper troughing that was out here over the Atlantic has tried to retrograde, and it's tried to push more into the East Coast, the eastern U.S. Right now, the thinking is that would reintroduce cold weather risks, potentially frost or freeze later in the month of April to Midwest and eastern U.S. But I mentioned it's kind of beyond kind of where we're at with that MJO forecast. If it transits and it gets out to phase 1 into phase 2, I could certainly see that. We'd have to reintroduce that frost risk. There's not a ton of confidence on that there. Again, I've said it before, but Eric's going to dive deeper into this tomorrow, and we've seen some of that ridging move out west in some of these forecasts. I mentioned just a bit ago that some of the ridging was strong enough from the ECMWF to get some flow back into Texas. We'll have to talk about that as well. I'll leave it there. I want to show you the final ECMWF forecast. This is April 5th through May 5th through precipitation anomalies. Not a huge change from what we talked about earlier this week in terms of that extended forecast from the ECMWF. Again, kind of a broken record, the same area that we talked about with increased precipitation. But if I show you the forecast earlier this week, drier earlier in portions of the Carolinas, Florida, even drier extending portions up of the western Corn Belt here. But the latest forecast update shifted a bit wetter in each regard, both in the upper Midwest, the northern plains, and portions of the Carolinas and Florida. And even some of this precipitation backing further into Texas here. So that precipitation forecast here looking a little bit wetter on kind of each flank of the drought here. So we'll continue to watch this as we go through the calendar month change in just a bit here. Eric will be back with you all tomorrow. Thank you for watching.